Here's an interesting question. As we had discussed, Ovādapāṭimokkha was taught on Magha Puja for the Savaka Sannipata. That means the spontaneous assembly of 1250 Arahants who all came without any announcement and were all personally ordained by the Buddha. So someone is asking now, as they're all Arahants, the teaching can't really relate to them. It must be meant for others. And in a sense, I agree, the Buddha would be quite aware that what he says on that occasion would be recorded and remembered. It's quite short, its verse is easy to remember. And moreover, it looks like, at least that's what the commentary tradition describes, that for the first 20 years in the sasana, this is a Patimokkha the Buddha would always recite when he would meet with the monks on the Uposatha days. And only after that, once corruptions became too strong and really serious transgressions happened, only then he started building up rule by rule as things were happening in the Patimokkha as we have it now. And he would stop participating and the monks would recite these Patimokkha consisting of specific rules. But in any case, in the first 20 years it was recited, so the Buddha was probably quite aware that it will continue and will be transmitted. However, even Arahants can delight in teachings. It doesn't mean that they stop delighting in the expression of the Dhamma and expression of the practice. And the Buddha is instituting a tradition, and even in these first 20 years, although the standard in the Sangha was high enough that the Buddha didn't have to start laying down specific rules, after some time I'm very sure there wouldn't be all Arahants. And so that was meant to be a system that can work longer. But even if you're talking only to Arahants, I mean in a sense that you can only sit silent. We were just discussing that recently. There's actually one occasion where the Buddha dismisses a group of monks because they're too loud. They arrive and then they meet the monks already in the place and they are discussing. That was before Instagram and email. So the only time you get any news, maybe from your family. And if you have, let's say, 500 monks coming, it's understandably it's a little bit noisy. But the Buddha had a very high standard when it came to Ariyo Tunni Bhavo, to noble silence. And he just dismissed them all for being too loud. They're like fishermen hauling in their catch and then taking it off. So these monks, however, were very diligent and dismissed by the Buddha. And their leader, Venerable Yasoja, reminded the monks that the Buddha is not doing that because he is angry, but out of compassion, out of kindness to them, to stir them up to be more diligent. So they spent the rains retreat at the bank of a river, Yaguna? I think Yaguna River. And they practice so diligently that they all become Arahants.
Yeah, but the simplistic lesson about not doing unwholesome things and doing wholesome things and purify your mind, that Arahants already done that.
They have done all of it. I wouldn't call it simplistic. An Arahant can delight in the fundamental truth of that teaching and the beautiful expression of the Dhamma practice. And as I said, after these monks then became enlightened, and the Buddha was wandering, and he was staying close by, and he could recognize with his psychic powers that they had been doing very well. And he gave a hint to Venerable Ananda that this direction where these monks are living is not disagreeable to him, and he would feel it's not disagreeable even going there. And then he is sending messengers, and the monks come to pay respects to the Buddha. And Venerable Ananda, who is not yet enlightened, who doesn't have all the psychic powers, he thinks, okay, the Buddha is maybe still grumpy because he doesn't, not grumpy, but he's still displeased with them because he doesn't say anything, they're just sitting silently. So when the Ananda gets up and encourages the Blessed One, the monks have come and maybe he likes to receive them or greet them. But the Buddha just remains silent because they're all sitting in Anendra Samadhi. Now they're all in the imperturbable Samadhi, which is meant usually for fourth jhana and higher. Unshakable Samadhi. And that goes through the night. Venerable Ananda is twice more asking the Buddha, don't you like to welcome these monks? And the Buddha in the end, he just speaks in Udana, that those who have abandoned desire, anger and all defilements, and that they are unshakable, unmovable like a mountain. So on this occasion the Buddha actually did what you suggested. So he was just sitting all night silently. And already even Venerable Ananda misunderstood that. It's also interesting that these monks were dismissed for talking too much. Now when they came back, it's maybe also reflecting the fact the original dismissal was for talking too much and too loud. And then now they just sit in unshakable samadhi. Now this is when the mind is truly quiet. There's really nothing moving anymore, not even rapture. So it's quite suitable that they're doing that all night. But even when the Ananda is already a little bit not clear what's going on. And I'm sure the Ovādapāṭimokkha is not quite short, it's 16 lines. And in the Savaka Sannipata, something that happens in every Buddha's dispensation, and they meet in the full moon night. Now, I think they're sitting there silently for a long time and meditate. And I think it would be almost a bit odd if the Buddha doesn't say anything. And if you say, the Arahants have practiced it already, then what are you left to talk about? Because you wouldn't want the Buddha to do worldly talk either, isn't it? Talking about the weather or about the king. So what to do? And so he's giving a summary of the training, and I'm sure that even Arahants can delight in that. It's very beautiful. And for example, you can reflect that you have done that. Now, often in the Theravada, the Arahants describe their practice, what they have been doing. And once your heart is liberated, and you have a great sense of appreciation and delight in the Dhamma. Now, this is already a quality of the stream enterer, a Sotapanna. That whenever the Dhamma is being taught, the true Dhamma of the Buddha, that they're lending ear automatically, they're immediately engaging, they're immediately alert, they delight in hearing the Dhamma. And that would include things which they have already done, like the practice of virtue. In fact, when the Buddha gives gradual teaching, the Buddha had the psychic ability, and is one of the Dasa Bala, the 10 powers of a Tathagata, that he can see the maturity of faculties of beings. This is more than just mind reading. A mind reader may see what goes on in your mind right now. But even a person of very great parami, if they haven't had any stages of enlightenment yet, if they're in a very stressful or challenging situation, they may have unwholesome thoughts. But the Buddha looks deeper, and he can see even someone like Angulimala, who had killed so many people, and he actually had the sufficient parami that he would be able to attain arahantship in this life. So a special ability of the Buddha. And if he sees that in a large assembly there's even just one person who has the ability, if the Buddha is teaching really skillfully, that they can realize there and then, even just stream entry, then the Buddha usually engages in the gradual disposition, gradual teaching. And one quality of the people who are listening to that, when you start talking, for example, about generosity, it's almost impossible to imagine that someone who has enough parami to attain just by listening to the Buddha would not delight in generosity and has not already done that. The whole point of this gradual teaching for someone who is actually able to realize the Dhamma now is that you're already talking, that the Buddha is first talking about things they're already familiar with. And they have the response that they feel very happy. The opposite happens with the people who don't have it. You actually lose them in their talk. And if there's a really stingy person in that assembly and the Buddha just goes on about the beauty of giving and sacrifice and generosity and dana, the stingy person will be actually unhappy. They will not enjoy that because it's against their character trait. And they may just get up and leave, or they just sit there and feel unpleasant or disengaged mentally. But exactly the person who already has done dana, or at least enjoys dana, he's actually with the Buddha. And then he goes through rebirth in the different realms of existence. And he goes through virtue. And by then you lose actually many people. There's quite a few who may not believe in different realms, who may not believe in rebirth, who may not believe in the efficacy of karma. And if you teach that quite extensively, they will not be happy. You lose them in the talk. I mean, even without any psychic powers, you can notice that sometimes when you teach Dhamma. You can notice that when you go into more deeper aspects of the Dhamma, you can sense that you're losing the audience. I mean, they literally may fall asleep or walk out. So the fact that someone has attained it doesn't mean that they don't delight when someone talks about it. Quite the opposite. The fact that they have done all these things and that they have really done it to the amount that they fully realized it, that means they have a really strong response. And they may not be able to express it so clearly and so concise. If you asked one of these 1250 Arahants, what is this practice you have done? They will not give you that brilliant answer like the Buddha. 16 lines, the most important things, in a graduated manner, in beautiful verse. Now, this is something which an Arahant does not necessarily have, the ability to express it so concise and so beautiful. But they had the ability of actually doing it. And if they then hear the Buddha expressing that in beautiful verse, in concise, and in a graduated way, and they will be extremely happy. And just like an Arahant will engage in practicing samadhi, which is also known as Ditta Dhamma Sukha Vihara, happy or blissful abiding here and now. And the Buddha encourages that. Of course, the Arahant doesn't have to practice jhana and samadhi. They already have completed the training in samadhi or even the training in wisdom. But they will do samadhi because it just feels great. And also it's calming and soothing for the whole body, refreshing the mind. So why not doing it? And listening to things that they have done doesn't mean they don't delight in it. Now you have all these discussions of sometimes very great monks, Punnamanthaniputta and Vandavasariputta, two Mahasavakas, and a long discussion. And they all delight in discussing the Dhamma. The Gosinga Sutta, where the monks get into the question who delights, who would illuminate this Gosinga forest. And then Ananda suggests monks discussing the Dhamma. And the Arahants were quite happy in discussing Dhamma. And then the other one, they will not say, yeah, I know that all by telling me that. They will feel quite happy when they hear Four Noble Truths, dependent origination. This is the thing they have realized. So, but thank you so much for that comment. Yeah.
I agree. I think the Buddha needs to summarize, but I think that gets recorded and it gets passed down to future generations. And that advice is more useful for us who aspire to Arahantship one day. But yeah, I think that summary gets passed down, which is becoming more useful for us.
So it's both. It was useful or delightful for those who are present at that moment. But as I fully agree, the Buddha would be aware that this is passed down. And he would teach us most likely also on these other Patimokkha's later, when they are monks who are not yet enlightened. And he would be aware that it gets passed down further. He would even tell that Buddha Vipassi was teaching it. There's a deliberate act of bringing that up again so it gets remembered. I think it's mostly aimed for monks. It's not aimed so much for lay community. The secluded dwelling place devoted to the higher mind, knowing the right measure. No, the right measure when eating you can also do in lay life. But particularly in the restraint according to the Patimokkha, the solitary resting place and devoted to the higher mind, that applies more to monks. And also this very strong teaching, not harming, not hurting, not insulting, for sure is also for lay people. But particularly the argument that the Buddha makes, someone who does that, inciting or harming others, is not a true monk, it's not a real ascetic. It's another indication, it's mostly meant for monks as the occasion. Yeah. So I think it's both. The awareness that it will reach also those who are not yet Arahants, but also in the right and the occasion it would stand. Yeah, thanks for that quite sharp question. For sure, they're all Arahants, so they know that. It is also helpful for them if these Arahants want to teach others. Because, as I pointed out, not every Arahant can express it so skillfully as a Buddha. Even though they can do it, or they have been able already, they have done it, they could do it, they might not be able to explain it so concise, precise and beautiful. But I'm very happy you asked the question. So Arahants do practice the samadhi, although they don't need it. But it's Ditta Dhamma Sukha Vihara. And if they're sitting in the full moon night, in this special event, which happens only once in our Buddha's sasana, I think something would be lacking if they're only sitting in Anendra Samadhi all night in silence. And you may notice that we don't know what else happened in that night, but this one we do know, because it was spoken. So to me it makes sense, even setting aside that it gets taught on to those who are not enlightened later, even just for the occasion, I think it's beautiful for the Buddha to say something. It would feel like something is a little bit lacking if there's nothing expressed verbally. I think the majority of the time they would be sitting silent probably and all in some deep samadhi.
This boy that told Nibbāna that he's going to pass away in 3 months.
Yeah, that is also on Magha Puja. Yes, correct. That one was 3 months before Parinibbāna, February, March, April, May. It was not only that he taught Venerable Ananda, that was that the Buddha deliberately stopped artificially extending his lifespan. That is a little bit tricky, and people sometimes get that wrong. So, in the last vasa, that is some 10 months before Parinibbāna, or something like that, the Buddha would have died already. But because it was in the rainy season retreat and they wouldn't have a chance to meet him and so on, the Buddha used his special abilities to artificially extend his lifespan. And on Magha Puja, 3 months before Parinibbāna, is when he deliberately made the resolution to stop that now and to attain Parinibbāna on a Vesak full moon. Yeah. And Venerable Ananda noticed the earthquake, and when the Buddha gave up the life force, which was sustaining him beyond his, so to speak, natural lifespan at that time, there was an earthquake, and Venerable Ananda realized that something happened, and then he asked.
Because he told Venerable Ananda a few times that if you have Nibbāna practice, completed Nibbāna, even Arahant can extend the lives.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I would want to go into that. We have only 2 minutes, and it's a completely different subject. So you are correct that the Buddha gave up the life force on Magha Puja, but this is at the very end of the sasana. The Magha Puja is within the first year after Sammasambodhi. So I think I don't have enough time to go into details here. And this also is a completely different subject. No, they would just offer the land. The Sima is the monastic boundary, and those days they had a very big Sima. Although I'm not sure at what stage the Buddha laid down the exact procedures for having Simas, because that is part of the development of the Sangha. But the offering was only the land, because that is what the laity owns and gives to the Sangha. Whereas the establishment of the monastic territory, the formal marking of the monastic territory, can be done by only the Sangha. Although nowadays when you do it, usually you involve the lay community, because they also like it, but it's not really necessary. But food, the monks can't do it on their own. And they also don't have money, so they cannot just buy property or something. So it was only offered only the land, and not even buildings yet, just the land. Any other?
Possible for an Arahant to still be worldly, in the sense that they go on operating as any other ordinary person would do?
No, there's 10 things which are impossible. Now, being worldly, I think you can clearly say that would be impossible in all respects. It's generally accepted that if someone attained arahantship in the lay state, they would immediately seek ordination. And the examples where that happened, like with Bahir Dharvachirya, he would immediately ask for ordination. It's impossible for them to break essential training rules, like intentionally killing any living being, intentionally stealing, intentionally lying, intentionally engaging in any sexual activity, for example. This would be a very important one. That is totally impossible for an Arahant. So in that sense, it's extremely difficult, basically impossible, to verify if someone is an Arahant, unless you're an Arahant yourself and you have the psychic power to read the mind. Other than that, you cannot basically verify that with certainty. However, it is possible to the opposite, to falsify. if you see someone intentionally killing living beings, you know for sure it can't be an arahant. If you see them engaging intentionally in any sexual activity, then they can't be an arahant. Same with stealing, same with lying. And then also really storing up sensual things is another impossibility. So worldliness depends how you define that. But certainly they wouldn't be worldly in a Dhamma sense. But there can also be people who are not worldly and not doing all these things without being an arahant. So it's very hard to positively verify.